You can be seated. Hello and welcome to MCA and Jacqueline Copley's oral. My name is Matt Waller. I had the pleasure of having Jacqueline in my American history class, so we had a lot of fun this year. She graded a lot of papers, so we did some good work. In the panel today, I have myself, Kevin Goldsmith, and Steve Westfall. So if you would, go ahead and pray with me. So God, we thank you for this day. God, we thank you for just the great message that's gonna come out, the blessing that Jackie was and is to MCA, and Lord, we ask that you just open our hearts up and open our minds up to the message that she has, and God, we thank you so much just for this opportunity. Be with her and be with us right now. So in your name we pray. Amen.
Today, roughly 77% of Americans are unhappy with their lives. That's over 253 million people. Further, in late 2018, a study conducted by the Gallup poll on well-being and happiness shows a sharp decline in positivity and contentment and a rise of scarcity in the hearts of Americans. You see, we have reoccurring thoughts of never enough, never good enough, never rested enough, never extraordinary enough, that never seem to cease. We're constantly needing more and grasping desperately at our heart's desire, the thing we believe will finally fill us up. But not only do we need more, we were created for more. We were created to live our lives with our whole heart, meaning that we were made to engage with life from a place of worthiness and enough. What gives this statement so much truth is that the idea of being created to live this way is not enough for our human nature to comprehend and simply believe. We need more. It's been proven time and time again that evidence alone is not enough to satisfy our minds. We were made with a desire to go further than just knowledge, to strive for greater than just ordinary, to do simply for the experience. We live and always have lived in a culture of do your best and be a little better than you are. And this way of thinking has stayed constant in our hearts, our country, and even our world for centuries. And right along with it, we find scarcity. As I said before, scarcity is the problem of never enough. Most commonly, never extraordinary enough. We have a fear of being ordinary that pushes us to want more, to be the greatest that we can be so that we stand out, so that when we die, we don't just fade away into the world of forgotten like so many of those before us. This fear of being unextraordinary is not our purpose. We were not created to simply live our lives in a state of never enough. We were made to be filled, to be whole. But how does our desperate craving to be extraordinary and our pursuits for greatness demonstrate that we were made to live our lives with a whole heart? The answer to this can be found in the common phrase, God-shaped hole. We all have one, and the truth is, we try to fill the hollowness that scarcity brings with good enough and extraordinary enough, because subconsciously, we think God cannot or will not fill that part of us. Our hearts are left discouraged and empty until we let them rest in Him, and we let Him fill us up. Further, God instructs us throughout His Word to engage with life in a wholehearted pursuit. He calls us to wholeheartedly love Him in Deuteronomy 6:5, trust Him in Proverbs 3:5, serve Him in 1 Samuel 12:24, and as Colossians 3:23 says, to work at everything we do with our entire heart. Now, striving to live a wholehearted life does not come with ease. As Pima Cordon once said, to be fully alive, fully human, and completely awake is to be continually thrown out of the nest. To live fully is to always be in no man's land. To experience each moment as completely new and fresh. To live is to be willing to die over and over again. In order to pursue a full life, we have to be willing to fail over and over again. We'll fall short because of failures and never measuring up, or striving to live whole for the wrong things, like self or substance. Oftentimes, when we pursue things like these, we deceive ourselves into thinking that we're indeed striving for a full life, when the truth is, we're simply masking our shortcomings, failures, selfishness, and greed with the perception of being whole. We see countless examples of this within Homer's work, the Iliad. Throughout the poem, we see characters striving for these ideas of self and substance and masking it with the pursuit of being whole, or enough. Paris for his appetite, Agamemnon for his prize, Achilles for his glory. And yet, despite their great efforts and sacrifices, the outcome always results in one thing: never enough. We find it easy to understand in instances such as these, But what we oftentimes don't consider is that we ourselves are constantly falling into these same routines, covering our destructive mindsets, such as lust for attention and self-satisfaction, with living wholeheartedly for others, and our pride with ambition. See, these views that we adopt for ourselves profoundly affect the way we lead our lives. And when we begin to speak change into our mindsets, change is mirrored in our life. But how do we bring about change? How do we avoid thoughts of self-doubt, fear, pride, powerlessness, and scarcity when it seems to be all that circulates in today's culture? Japanese politician Nato Kan once said, "If you're unable to understand the cause of the problem, it's impossible to solve it." So, what is a destructive mindset, and how do they come about? A destructive mindset can be defined as any way of thinking that causes one to act in a mental state of excess or deficiency, affecting the way that they think and in turn act. Our mindsets are most commonly formed by the habits we develop over time, and our habits come from beliefs that we obtain through our emotions and experiences. These beliefs directly influence every area of our life, including our psychology, physiology, behavior, and performance. And it's when we hold negative views of these results that we begin to be thrown into reoccurring cycles of never enough, forming consistent habits and molding mindsets. It's in these instances where it's crucial we keep an open mind. Oftentimes, our own thoughts, especially when they concern oneself, are untrue. By promoting open-mindedness in our lives, we can begin to discern what thoughts should reign true and hold weight in our lives from those that are untrue and not in accordance with reality. It's crucial that we allow others to speak positivity into our lives and embrace constructive criticism as an aid to self-improvement rather than a means meant to tear us down. Next, we need to observe every thought, taking them captive and living in the present. We as humans are only allotted so much time on this earth, so better to spend a little time to deem a thought unworthy of tearing us down than to spend our life in a place of self-doubt and unhappiness. We commonly find ourselves most susceptible to destructive mindsets in times of great anxiety. And it's in these exact moments that it's crucial we take a step back to observe the things going through our minds and find the balance between excess and deficiency of our thoughts. For the last 12 summers of my life, I've attended Lady Lodge Youth Camp, a place where cultivating this is an everyday practice. In my interview with one of the camp's current leaders, Deborah Butt Rogers, our culture's current problem of overwhelming anxiety and how we could best solve it was explained to me like never before. She said, "Today, so much of our society runs on busyness, individualism, and indifference, distracting us from deeper connections that lead to transformation. We experience the world as polarized, judgmental, and dismissive, denying our needs to be heard, understood, and valued. Society is controlling, skeptical, and unimaginative, making it difficult to embrace hope, the unknown, beauty, and love. The foundation solution to combating this issue comes by working to facilitate connections, allowing people to know and be known by one another, and creating an opportunity for transformation to take root. We work to transform these cycles of brokenness by providing people with an opportunity to experience healthy rhythms and allowing them to find their balance and be filled with things like worship, play, quiet, nature, and most prominently, community. Author Brené Brown, in her book Daring Greatly, describes several pillars to aid in the pursuit of wholehearted living. The first of these is self-compassion and spiritual resilience. As we all know, we mess up. We fall short again and again, and no matter how hard we try or how much work we put in, we oftentimes, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, result in a self-shaming session. Cultivating a mindset of self-compassion and strength requires us to look deep into our own shortcomings and realize that they don't define us. We have to realize that we may mess up, but we are not messed up. There are 3 foundational elements to self-compassion, the first of these being self-kindness. Self-kindness is finding the strength within us to speak life over ourselves even when we don't feel worthy. The second element to this is common humanity, or recognizing that our sufferings and feeling of inadequacy are part of our human nature and are not unique to each person. The final element is mindfulness. This requires that we take captive our every thought and not over-identify with our thoughts and feelings so that we're drowned in negativity. When we cultivate this, the strength of our spirit and compassion begin to spread through not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us. The next pillars described by Brown are that of joy and gratitude. A common misconception of today's culture is that joy and happiness can be used interchangeably, but this is not accurate. In Greek, we learn that the word for happiness is mirikos. Mirikos is used to describe the freedom the rich experienced from the problems of everyone else. We also learned that joy was far different from this. The word for joy in Greek is kario. Kario was used to describe something that was only found in God, and was often referred to as the good mood of the soul. Based on this, we can gather that the two definitions differ greatly, in that one is of the Lord and one is of the world. But it is through gratitude that the joy of the Lord is obtained. Author Marianne Williamson puts this expertly. Joy is what happens to us when we allow ourselves to recognize how good things really are. Continuing, Brown writes the pillar of play. Play is such a crucial aspect in pursuing a wholehearted life, but is so oftentimes overlooked. Research by psychiatrist and author Dr. Stuart Brown shows that play is at the core of our creativity and innovation, and helps cultivate empathy in our lives. He says, the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. Respecting our biologically programmed need for play can transform work. It can bring back excitement and newness to our job. Play helps us deal with difficulties, and true play that comes from within our own needs and desires is the only path to finding lasting joy and satisfaction in our work. In the long run, work does not work without play. Finally, we see the pillars of vulnerability and authenticity. Now, most of us, when we hear the word vulnerability brought into play, retreat into a mindset of refusal. But vulnerability is a crucial part in the pursuit of a wholehearted life. In order to lead a whole life, we not only have to be vulnerable with God, ourselves, and others, but we must be authentic in our vulnerability, not using it as a status or a shield, but rather as a means to further necessary connection with those we develop relationships with and trust. If we are to be authentic in our vulnerability, we have to cultivate the courage to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, and allow ourselves to engage in our vulnerability. We'll be thrown into positions where necessary chances must be taken in order to further our hearts in their journey to being whole. In American history, President Theodore Roosevelt once said, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows an end and triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." Striving to live a wholehearted life requires us to dare greatly and take chances, whether it's through our necessary vulnerability with others or taking a step of faith that doesn't have great odds. I'd like to close with the story of a man named Howard Butt Jr. Throughout his life, Mr. Butt was extremely open and honest about his struggles with clinical depression. He was very vulnerable and authentic about the things that were difficult and not perfect. He lived this way at a time when it was taboo to have a therapist, or not widely accepted in Christian circles that one would need to seek medical attention for depression. It wasn't until he stopped asking God to take away his depression and started thanking him for what he would do through it that Mr. Butt truly discovered his pursuit of wholeness. His circumstances led him to take a step of faith and step down from his position as president of H-E-B Supermarkets to begin the Laity Lodge Foundation, which in turn has resulted in the transformation of so many people since 1961. This transformation was only made possible because he took a chance and pursued God's will for his life wholeheartedly. By this, he has ultimately created a space for deep connection to be found between people, which sprouted from his vulnerability and his showing people that following Christ isn't always easy, and it can sometimes still be really hard. This was key in helping other people open up and know that it's okay to talk about what's hard in life. In fact, it's necessary if we want to be whole. When he was vulnerable, it began to allow other people to feel safe with one another, because if he could be vulnerable and honest, they could do the same. Further, by his everyday choice to cultivate joy and healthy mindsets, even in the darkest of times, he's made a way for people to experience a happiness that can only be found in God, and along the way has changed the lives of so many others. Now, this isn't just a story of a happy man who struggled and overcame. This is the reality of a man who chose the joy of the Lord over all else and pursued life with his whole heart, despite every mountain he faced. I encourage you to strive for this exact thing because you were made for more. Thank you.
Jackie, that was great, excellent, very encouraging, and I've really enjoyed this exercise as well. So, tell us what's your plans for next year? What are you doing?
I plan on going to Texas Tech University and majoring in marketing with a concentration of sales.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Now, tell us what got you to this topic of wholeheartedness.
Okay, so my whole life, I've always been a really big risk taker. So we started off with a topic of risk.
Yeah.
And you suggested the book by Brene Brown, Daring Greatly. And as I read through that book, I started kind of realizing things in my life about the risks that I was taking and about the life that I was leading that were unnecessary, and realized that there's so much more to risk than just like taking a chance. And so we came up with the topic of like pursuing life with your whole heart, and ended up integrating risk into that. Yeah. So
you're kind. You give me credit. You said we. It was all you. I remember you coming into my office and saying, "I think I should do this," and I was like, "Wow, that was a phenomenal. It's just an awesome kind of flip to make." A few days ago, we were sitting in the office, kind of talking through it as well, and we realized we left something out. And I think it's a worthwhile topic to address. And it wasn't even in your paper, shockingly, was the idea of hot wiring relationships. Mm-hmm. Just a couple of minutes or seconds, rather. Tell us about what does it mean to hot wire a relationship?
Okay, so hot wiring a relationship basically means that you're trying to kind of kickstart a relationship with someone that you don't really know. Like, I had a big problem with doing this. I would meet someone and immediately want to be their friend, and I figured out that the fastest way to do that was to be honest and real with them. Mm-hmm. So I would just tell them everything, like the good, the bad, the dirty, everything. And looking back and after reading Brene Brown's book, it was also kind of a shield to like protect myself from having to open up about the things that were really like struggling with. So yeah, hot wiring a relationship is really overall just kind of floodlighting people, like pouring everything onto somebody that you haven't really developed a relationship with and doesn't really know you, and it's not really a mutual thing. So,
gotcha. So it's like a filter for vulnerability, like not being completely vulnerable. So what's the message like for? I mean, I feel like this is something all 7th through 12th graders need to hear. What's the message? What's the clear message you'd give for that?
I think authentic in your vulnerability is a really big thing, and making sure that when you're vulnerable, it's with someone that you've developed a relationship with and that you trust and that loves you and will be able to look at the things that you're genuinely struggling with and love you through that. So.
Nice. Cool. Another thing that was left out in the talk, but was in your paper, was you talked about Aristotle's excesses and deficiency, the golden mean. So talking about the golden mean being wholeheartedness, what's the excess, what's the deficiency there?
So the excess was living wholeheartedly for like people, just giving, and like the world, just giving everything that you have to everyone around you, and not leaving any time for your relationship with Christ and your relationship with other people. The deficiency, I believe, was basically just not living wholeheartedly at all, just kind of putting little bits of yourself into every area of your life, including your relationship with people in Christ, and not really giving it everything that you have.
Gotcha. Cool. So I'm spent a couple weeks powering through Brene Brown's book as well, and she mentioned the Velveteen Rabbit, and so she pulls a little bit out of it. And I'm going to read a section of the Velveteen Rabbit out, and I'm gonna pep you with a few questions from it. Okay. So, this is the part. It's in the beginning. I just finished reading it to my kids too, but it's in the beginning of the book. The rabbit has just kind of discovered that he's a toy, and the boy hasn't even like noticed him. So he got him as a gift. The rabbit really hasn't become his toy. And he's sitting in the playroom, and he's talking to the horse, one of the the toy horse that's in there. And it says to him, he says, and the horse is the skin horse. It says, "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender, before Nanny came to tidy up the room. "Does it mean having things buzz inside you, and a stick-out handle?" The horse replied, "Real isn't how you're made. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you so much for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, "for he always was truthful." The skin horse is always truthful. "When you're real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" the rabbit asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges, who have to be carefully kept. And so, generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair is loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter after all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except for the people that don't understand you. So my question's kind of on that. If I feel like the rabbit is in a place that he's becoming wholehearted. Yeah. Right? And so just the advice you hear from the horse and the questions that come back and forth, does becoming wholehearted, does it hurt?
I think there's going to be times where it hurts because, kind of like I said, vulnerability isn't an easy thing for a lot of people. And sometimes it hurts to talk about what's hard, and it's hard to go through what's hard. So I'd say sometimes it hurts, yeah. But I think overall, in the end, it's going to be so much sweeter and so much more joyful than anything else. And it's going to be so worth the pain.
Does it happen all at once or bit by bit?
I think it happens over time. I don't think you can just wake up one day and boom, you're wholehearted. I think that it's going to have to be something that you kind of push for and you work for and you pursue hard. So
the horse then says it takes a long time, but he says that's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Do you think that's true of becoming wholehearted? Is there certain people that it's harder for them to do that?
So is it harder for people that
break easily
to become wholehearted?
Yeah.
I think it's harder, yes, but I don't think it's impossible. Yeah. Like I said, I think it's going to have to be something that you push through, and that you focus on the end result for. Because I don't think it's going to be, like I said, I don't think it's going to be easy, and it's going to hurt. And if you break easily, that's going to be a hard thing, and you're going to have to learn to push through that and work through that. So.
Good. He also says, then there's going to be people that won't understand your wholeheartedness. How will there be people that won't understand the wholeheartedness that you have?
Will you repeat the question?
It's okay. I'll change it a little bit. So, I would imagine there are people that won't understand your wholeheartedness, right?
Yes.
What do you do with people that just don't get it?
I think the only thing that you can do with people who don't get it is two things: love them and show them, because really that's the only way of understanding something like this is through being shown, and then through not only being shown, but like being loved while they're showing you. And it's not like self-absorbed, like cocky, like, oh, I'm better than you. It's, I love you and I want this for you, so I'm going to show you.
Yeah. Nice. And then he also says, the other question that comes up later is it something that you can lose, wholeheartedness? Can you lose that?
I would say yes. You can lose it if you don't maintain it, because it's not just something you achieve and then you're there. It's something that you have to continue to work at, and if you don't continue to work at it, then you're going to lose your heart for it, and obviously you can't have wholehearted without a heart. So
yeah, there you go. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic.
Hi, Jackie.
Hey, Mr. Goldsmith.
How we doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. Okay, so can you define wholeheartedness for me?
So I said that wholeheartedness is engaging with life from a place of worthiness and enough.
Okay. All right, so my first question, now that we have that definition there, is there's a passage in your paper where you say, we have a fear of being ordinary that pushes us to want more and be the greatest we can be so that we stand out. So when we die, we do not just fade away into the land of forgotten like so many others before us. So you talk about the fear of being ordinary that pushes us. Do you think healthy insecurity is a good thing or a bad thing when thinking about your life and what you want?
So you're asking if, like, there's...
Just thinking about your life and kind of long term and what you want to get out of it and what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. Is it good to have a healthy sense of insecurity, like, hey, am I doing this part of my life right or not? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
I don't think insecurity can be healthy, but I think it is a part of life.
Something we deal with.
I think humility and knowing when you can't do something is healthy, but I don't think that thinking that you can't do something so you're not going to do it is healthy. So I'd say it's a bad thing.
Right. Okay, I have a follow-up to that. There's a quote I found when coming up with the questions for this. The quote says, they say you die twice, once when you stop breathing, and the second a bit later on when somebody mentions your name for the last time. Do you think that thinking in that quote, does that complement the wholehearted life, kind of give you a sense of urgency, or is it incompatible with it? What would you say?
I'd say it's incompatible because if you're truly living wholehearted, then that is going to have an impact on somebody in your life and lead them to try and pursue the same things, which will, like, kind of a domino effect, have an impact on somebody in their life and have an impact on somebody in their life. So even if your name is forgotten, I don't think your legacy and the, like, impact that you had on other people will be.
Sure. That's awesome. Another question. You write in your paper, you say, we were not created to simply live our lives in a state of never enough. We were created to be filled, to be whole. And so to be filled and to be whole. So can you explain how that is different than hedonism, which is just the theory, the ethical theory that the greatest good is human pleasure, and we should try to get please ourselves in life. So how is that different?
So, if I'm correct, hedonism is, like, self-pleasure and, like, self-indulgence and stuff like that. So I think those are more worldly things. And I think being filled and being whole is more of a spiritual, like, heart thing. I don't think you can...
Kind of transcendental?
Yeah, I don't think you can see it. Like, you can see the effect that it has, but I don't think you can literally see somebody, like, heart filling up.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I hope not. Okay. All right. You mentioned a God-shaped hole. So there's a passage you say, we all have one. We all have a God-shaped hole. And the truth is we try to fill the hollowness that scarcity brings in our hearts with good enough and extraordinary enough because subconsciously we think God cannot or will not fill that part of us. So can you just explain what a God-shaped hole is?
So God-shaped hole was originally brought up by Basil Pascal, or Blaise Pascal. Basil, I know, it's okay. It's spelled that way. And I actually have a quote that I left out. I think it's right here.
Sure.
I left it out of the speech. I don't know why. But it says, what else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim? But that there was once in a man true happiness, of which all that now remains is empty print and trace. This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking things that are not there, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are. Though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled with only an infinite and immutable object, in other words, God himself. So basically what that's saying is that we have a hole in our spiritual life and in our hearts that can only be filled by something infinite and unchanging. And so that's kind of where that came from. And so we try to fill this hollowness. Our human nature is never enough.
Right.
We all have thoughts of never enough, never rested enough, never good enough, never extraordinary enough, like I said. And that scarcity that we have in our lives kind of brings this hollowness that was naturally there, and it makes it bigger. And so we try to fill this hollowness that it brings with the opposite of that, because logic. And that would be good enough and extraordinary enough.
Right.
So does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So just in a nutshell, so is a God-shaped hole a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't think it's either or. I think it's part of our human nature, which would lead me to say that it's bad.
Okay.
But I also believe that it drives us to seek out God.
Okay.
And in the end, it drives us to really faith in God.
Okay,
So.
that's very neat. So we have this natural shortcoming, and God uses it to build, to be a bridge to Him. What do you say to someone who says there aren't any God-sized holes in my life? They kind of have this, I've checked myself out and I'm good. How can you, I don't know, tell them otherwise? Christ, or should you?
I really think if somebody is being 100% honest with themselves and with others, then they're going to discover that God-shaped hole. Whether it's in never being happy enough or always needing more. I feel like they have one.
So they're just not being honest with themselves, and they need to
yes, sir.
be a little more reflective. You have this quote in there. You say, to live is to be willing to die over and over again. To pursue a full life, we have to be willing to fail over and over again. So a couple questions here. Has there ever been a time when you failed, but that ended up being better for you than if you had succeeded?
Yes. When? Probably in physics. Because physics was really hard for me. I couldn't really understand it no matter how hard I tried.
Right.
And eventually just gave up trying. And it's kind of through that failure that I started building relationships with tutors and started learning that it's okay to be bad at something and it's okay to fail at something as long as you don't give up on it.
Right.
And I think that that not giving up on it was part of the failure being good for me.
Right. Absolutely. That's an awesome answer. Thanks for sharing. And then I know you senior assisted for American history, so can you think of anyone in American history that we think of as very successful but actually had been a failure before, or anything going on?
Oh, I thouh you were meaning in the class. I was like, you want me to call somebody out?
No. No. Yeah. No. Not getting that. No. But can you think of a figure in American history who had failed, not a student? I need to word these better. But anybody from American history that pops out that we think of as successful, but actually had a time in their life where they failed spectacularly.
Yes. Let me think of a good one.
Go for it.
I think I'm going to use von Steuben. because he's fresh on my mind.
Oh.
He had initially started out.
Uh-huh.
His career wasn't that successful,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people thought he was gay.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up coming in and training
Mm-hmm.
thousands of American troops
Mhm.
into being good soldiers, which eventually led to the success of several battles, and I think the war, right? So
Which war?
World War... What?
You meant American Revolutionary War. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
All right. So back to.
It's okay.
She's got a lot.
Are there? I have a few more questions I want to get, and then I'll pass the mic. So, okay, are there successful people who are not living wholeheartedly?
Oh, yes. I don't think you have to be wholehearted
Mm-hmm.
to be successful in today's world.
Okay,
I
so
think-
or go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go.
Well, I was going to say the flip side of that, and the two questions here. So the flip side of that is, can a failure live a more wholehearted life than a successful person? And I think that was going along with what you were just saying. So.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So I really do think that people who have failed continually
Mhm.
can live a wholehearted life,
Mhm.
because I think failure is part of wholehearted life.
Right.
And I think if you're good at everything
Mhm.
and you're not failing at anything, then you're
Mhm.
not growing.
Right.
So, yes, I think I don't know that they could live a more wholehearted life than a successful person,
Mhm.
because I think everybody can live wholeheartedly different.
Sure.
But yes, I think they can be wholehearted even though they are failures.
Sure, absolutely. And then I think two more questions. So when you think of a wholehearted life, who's kind of your role model? Or who would you say to someone, this is someone who's living wholeheartedly? I would encourage you to, live like them. So, obviously the perfect example of, being a Christian or the highest person in Christianity is Christ, right? Like
Yeah.
he's the role model. So wholeheartedness, who would that be to you?
Dang, there's 3 that come to mind
Okay.
right off the bat.
Man.
Miss Butt, Miss Deborah Butt Rogers. Just everything that her and her family have done is just so incredible,
Mhm.
and that can only be done
Mhm.
like if you have a whole heart for God and you have a whole heart for people. And then the other 2 are my mom and dad, because they never do anything halfway, and
That's awesome.
including like loving people. So
That's awesome. Last question last pair of questions before I pass the mic. You say habits are formed through the reconstruction of our neural networks by reoccurring beliefs we obtain through our experiences and emotions. So you're talking about habits there. So the first question is, what are good habits you have, and what are some habits you wish you had?
I think good habits that I have are just being able to have fun
Mhm.
and like really cultivate play,
Mhm.
because that's always been a big thing
Yeah.
for me, is just like not letting situations get too serious,
Mhm.
and just kind of having fun in everything that I do.
Mhm.
My mom calls it a party waiting for a place to happen. And I think something that I wish that I had was, what's the opposite of procrastination? I'm a big procrastinator. That's
Mhm.
a bad habit that I have. So
Fixing that.
fixing
yeah,
that
proactive.
would be a good habit that I want.
So what habits would you say to younger students looking back on your career at MCA and just life in general? What habits would you say you need to develop these now? Like you see a lot of kids that like don't have these, or you wish you had. What would you say you need to develop these habits now?
Specifically at MCA, I think patience and understanding is a big thing. Understanding that your tutors are really just caring for you, and they're wanting you to learn, and they're wanting you to grow, but also kind of on the other side that they also have stuff going on in their lives, and they need a little bit of grace there too. And then procrastination, again, I wish I learned that,
Being proactive.
please.
So which tutors need the most grace? Just kidding, don't answer that. All right, we're going to pass the
loaded
mic.
questions.
All right.
All right. Okay. So I just want to jump in, talk about contentment. The Bible talks a lot about contentment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Paul says in 1 Timothy 6:6, now godliness with contentment is great gain. So how do I balance this call for contentment as a believer with this daring greatly? Like, how do those two match up?
I think that being content in our lives is super important, in that we need to be okay with like the position that God has us in, but we also need to always be striving for growth, not only like in worldly terms, but like in spiritual terms. So just being grateful for where we are and where God has us, but reaching for more, reaching to better ourselves and better the world around us.
Okay, so maybe being content, like whatever your gifting or position is, but being the best at that thing that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. So you talk about in here, scarcity is a problem of never enough, most commonly never extraordinary enough. And so if that's a universal desire of man or humankind to want to be extraordinary, why are there so many lazy people in this world?
So you're asking if we all have a desire to be extraordinary, why?
Why are people so lazy? Yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with hope and having the hope and having the will to know that you were made for more and actually go out and pursue that and work for that. So I think it's just all about, it comes down to like hope and will. So
Okay, so let's bring it down to MCA. So there are more than a few students who are lazy, all right? Okay, and so with that, like, how can we propel people to dare greatly? How can we give them hope to do better than they're doing?
I think relationship is probably the biggest part of that, at least that I've experienced. Like I said, when I was doing super bad at physics, I was really poured into by a bunch of different tutors that kind of encouraged me, like, hey, you're better than this. Mm-hmm. You can do more than this. And, like, you may not be fantastic at it. They were just, like, real and honest with me. They're like, you may not be fantastic at it, but you can definitely, like, do better. You just have to work for it. So I think encouragement through relationship.
So how did you take that when they told you you may not be great at this? I mean, were you offended, or how'd you receive that?
I think most of the time I was like, you have no idea. Like, I'm really bad at this. But
good.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times it was with Mr. Perea that really got me through that. I would go in his office and I would get help, and I was like, wow, you really don't understand how much I don't enjoy this. And
Okay.
he would kind of just like walk me through it slowly and kind of encourage me that I was better than that and I could do better than that. I just had to work a little harder for it.
Okay.
So.
All right, because I want to pick up on that for a minute. You were saying you don't have no idea how bad I am at this.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking for about the last year or so this idea of negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I hear students or even my own children say, well, I'm trash at this. And I call them on it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that, there's the old saying, God didn't make no trash. And so this idea of negative self-talk, how did that play in? Because it seems like some negative self-talk, right? Of like, you have no idea how bad I am. How did that play into you turning the corner, at least working hard with physics?
So I talk in here about destructive mindsets.
Right.
And that was definitely one of them, was that there's no way I could be good at this. There's no way I'm ever going to try to be good at this. It's just the worst. And I think that having that coming in one ear and then a bunch of different tutors whispering in my other ear, like, no, you have got this and you can do this. And this is something that is, like, attainable. And I think just cultivating that in my mind rather than letting my own thoughts get to me was super important, and having self-compassion for myself, just being like, okay, I may mess up sometimes at this, but that does not mean like I am messed up as a person, and that does not mean I am messed up in the field of physics, like in general. So
okay, very good. So we're talking about self-compassion. Where's the balance between self-compassion and like unrepentant sin. You know, for instance, you know, this idea of how far does it extend? Like if I have grace on myself or compassion on myself, but what if I'm a murderer? You know, like I murdered another person today. Well, let me just have some compassion on myself. You know, I shouldn't have done that, but let me forgive myself. I mean, where does that extend? How far should this self-compassion go?
I think with something as drastic as like
And I haven't done that
murder.
today. But
Okay, that's good.
so, yeah.
I think with something that big, self-compassion should still be there, and it should still be there in all situations, but it should come after repentance and after like you've taken it to God and kind of given that to him and turned around.
Okay. So self-compassion doesn't mean we never have to repent.
Yes.
Okay. All right, last one, and then I'll pass it back. So this pursuit, I just have a little question for you. You know, it says that the biblical evidence is that we were created to pursue wholeness. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it's interesting and kind of I want to be a little bit nitpicky here. What's the difference between pursuing wholeness or pursuing God? Because it seems like to me Scripture says we're to pursue God, but you're saying we're to pursue wholeness. So how might I make sense of that?
I think wholeness and relationship with God go hand in hand. Okay. Because, like, I forget who I was talking to with it about, but worship and wholeness and, like, community. Mm-hmm. We can have community with, like, God but not have worship. And if that's the case, I really just don't think you're doing it right.
Okay.
But if you have worship without relationship and community with God, then it's really just kind of an empty worship, like you're just singing songs or praising. And so I think that wholeness comes with God, and I think that wholeness comes with relationship with God.
Okay. So would it be fair to say then, as we pursue God, then we experience wholeness? Like God comes first and the wholeness comes after? Or how does that work?
So you're kind of asking, like, if you can be an unbeliever and still be whole.
There you go.
Okay. I think that you can live a whole life. Like, you can live life with your whole heart and still be an unbeliever. But I don't think you will ever be whole without God. I think that final, like, being okay in every situation and being worthy in every situation comes with God. And I don't think that you can be whole without that.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Jackie.
Got a little bit more time, so we're gonna just got a few questions and then just do a few more. So in this work, I've been reading this book too. My wife's reading it, and so we're all about it right now. But in writing this paper and examining, how has this changed you doing this exercise?
Probably most prominently is, like I said, I used to be still am, really big risk taker. I just have more, like, meaning to the risks that I take and, like, kind of calculate them, like, is this going to make me a better person, or is this just, like, for the attention? And so I think in that, definitely, and then with vulnerability, like I said, I used to flood light all the time and kind of hotwire relationships, and now my relationships are more authentic, and they're more real, and they're more, like, deep-seated and have stronger roots because I'm not just, like, pouring everything out on everybody and they're like, whoa, okay. Yeah. So I think probably through my relationships being more authentic and through, like, meaning to risks that I take.
Mm-hmm. You spoke about scarcity also. How have you overcome, or how are you starting to overcome scarcity, that scarcity mindset?
So, two of them really stuck out for me. Actually, all of them really stuck out for me, but two I'm going to talk about. Never rested enough is one of the first things that I say every time I get up in the morning. It's like, wow, I didn't get enough sleep. Mm-hmm. And I think just getting up and not immediately starting off my life with I don't have enough. Yeah. So instead just saying, like, it's going to be a good day, and just starting that day off with positivity And then never extraordinary enough. I mentioned that a lot in my paper because it's something that I really struggled with. And just knowing that I am extraordinary enough and God, because God doesn't make ordinary people. So, yeah.
I'm going to go to Mr. Goldsmith. We don't have a ton of time, so.
Oh my gosh, how do we only have 5 minutes left?
It's not all your 5 minutes.
Okay. Obligatory question. All right. Favorite memory from government and economics this year?
Oh, boy. There's so many. I don't know if I can say my favorite one. So
Then don't.
So I'm going to say a different one. That's probably the most recent on my mind.
Okay.
And that's this Wednesday. We did Quizlet Live, which is basically like a trivia thing with economics terms. And we play that several times, and it's just super fun because I'm super competitive, and a lot of them are super competitive. And Mr. Goldsmith just sits back and laughs at us. And then we got done with that, and Mr. Goldsmith and Mr. McDuffie had gone and hidden Easter eggs for us, even though we're seniors. We got to go hunt them, and got a bunch of candy, and he had brought cookies, and yeah, it was just really fun, and it was really nice to kind of spend a lot of time with Mr. Goldsmith and then a bunch of my class. So
That was
Yeah.
fun. I had a blast doing that. Okay, you talk about constructive criticism and how we need to give it and how we need to be able to take it. How do you constructively criticize a friend? Because you can do this effectively or ineffectively, and if you do it ineffectively, you know, you may have just burned a bridge there. So how do I do that?
I think the most important thing about constructive criticism as making sure that you come from a place of love and you come from a place of truly caring about the person and truly like having a deep-seated worry that this, like the thing that they're doing right now and the way that they're acting right now is not going to lead them to a good place later on.
Okay.
So I think the most important thing is love and just loving that person and loving through and understanding, obviously.
Right. That's a great answer, Jackie. You talk about self-compassion and worthiness, adequacy and shame, and how we should kind of avoid these things, okay? You talk about self-compassion several times. Is there ever a time in life to feel unworthy, inadequate, or ashamed?
No.
Okay.
And I say that because I don't think feeling unworthy is ever a good thing in life because I feel like we are worthy. We were created worthy. And then ashamed. I don't think ashamed is a good thing either. And this is why. Because I think ashamed is a more overarching, like, I don't want to talk about this. I just want to push it away. I want to bury it, and I don't want to think about it again. So I don't think ashamed is a good thing, but I think guilt is a good thing because it's temporary and it can be forgiven.
Okay.
And a lot of times when we view ourselves with shame, we view it as something that can't be forgiven and something that doesn't ever need to see the light of day again.
Okay. That's awesome. You mentioned the Teddy Roosevelt quote, which I love, where there's part of that on this campus. Do you know where it's at?
It's on a plaque
Yeah.
on some center block.
Yeah, like right
Somewhere.
outside the resource center. Last couple of questions. Actually, in that quote you give, since I've taken this to heart, and I noticed at the very end something was missing. There's part of the quote that's left off. So in the quote you put in your paper, you say, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. It goes on for a little bit more, though. So if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat, people who've never tried anything. So how big of an obstacle is the fear of failure to living a wholehearted life?
I'd say pretty big, because failure is always a scary thing, whether it happens a lot or whether it's not. Yeah, I think it's a big thing that we all have to overcome, and it's not unique to anybody. And like I said, it's part of our human nature to fail. And I think that part of overcoming that is looking at everybody else and knowing that they fail too, but continuing to like push through even though you do fail.
Okay, perseverance. And then last question, what would you say to an unmotivated person because they have failed many times?
I'd probably just try to push the point like as hard as I could that they were made for more, and that failure like is not the reason we're created, and that we were made to be good and we were made to be extraordinary. And like I said, God does not make ordinary people. So even if you're bad at everything, there's something that God has created you to be extraordinary at, and that is the one thing that you can succeed at all the time and you will be good at. So
Failure is a chapter. That's not the whole story.
yeah.
All right. There you go.
All right, so you've done well. We're out of time, so it's your turn to ask us a question if you desire. Did you forget about that part?
I did. But
You wanted to skip it then?
no, I can probably find something. I remembered it like 10 minutes before I went out there and was like, I'm going to get one, and then I didn't get one.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say, which of Brene Brown's pillars that I talked about in my speech should you work to cultivate more, and why?
Whoever wants to go first. I'll go last.
I'll go first. I gotta rethink about them. Do you recall which ones you mentioned?
Yeah, it's self-compassion and spiritual resilience. Those are like 2 in 1. Joy and gratitude, play, and vulnerability and authenticity.
I think for me, we've been going through this book. I'm listening to it. My wife's listening to it too. So for us, it's been vulnerability, but then also realizing like her vulnerability too, and just kind of. I've been kind of thinking through, praying about different ways for us to grow in our relationship, because if you Google it, all you see is okay, growth in relationship. It always ends in marriage, and like, well, that's not good enough for me. I got another 50 years to think about here. So, the next spot for us, I think, is okay. How do we be vulnerable or being aware of each other's positions and places, parenting and things we do together. So, I think it's that So. It's a good question.
So I would say self-compassion. I think there's a healthy amount of self-criticism you need to have, but I think I can take that way too far a lot of times, just to where it's like unhealthy, and you never have anything good to say about yourself. And so when I was reading through your paper and you talked about Dr. Neff, I think it was, in the self-compassion research lab, my knee-jerk reaction was, self-compassion research now. What is she, like a professional pity partier running a snowflake factory? Anyway, just naturally, like I'm very hard. So when I hear that, I'm like, but I actually think that's one of the things I need to work on the most. And there's obviously a lot to work on, but that would be mine. So.
Well, as I look at these, it's probably all of them. There's a lot to work on there. I would say probably for me the two is I probably have the best relationships when I'm vulnerable with people. And I think that just the positions that I'm in and my jobs, it's hard to do that. When you are the authority, it's a challenge of kind of how vulnerable to be. Because when you talked about like the floodlighting people and the hot wiring, that's my natural tendency. It's just, all right, let's have a relationship. Here's everything about me. But then kind of what's the balance? And then I think also the play is like for me and just kind of where I am in life, I feel guilty if I take off time for anything. It's like there's always something I should be doing in a duty. But then I can see how just relaxing and having a time to play is important. So I think there's a lot to think about in this. So, well, thanks. That was good asking questions on the fly. Very well done. you did it. You did a great job. And so let me pray, and you'll be done.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for Jackie and just how she carried herself today and the things that she shared. And I pray that as she goes on to tech next year, that you would bless her, that you'd lead and guide her and help her just to have discernment on where to go and what to do, and that she would grow in these things that she's talked about today. And Lord, and that she would also just have the relief of having this thing over with and enjoy the rest of her senior year. Let's pray in Jesus' name. Amen.